Is there anyone who wants to pull anything off to have a separate vote, not to have a discussion or some commentary, but just a separate vote? Any items?
Yeah, Councilmember, Mayor Medina, I apologize.
That's all right. Yeah.
I don't need a separate vote, but I did want to talk about the item number. I'm sorry. No, it was in reference to the paving.
So G?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I accidentally clicked on a different agenda.
No problem. And I want to make some comment just on H. Is there anybody else that wants anything else? Marty?
That would be F, please.
You got it. Anything else? Okay, hearing and seeing none, do I have any action to approve consent items A through E? Need a motion.
Move to approve.
Move to second.
I have a motion by Salazar, seconded by Davis. We need a roll call, City Clerk.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Mason?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Yes.
Mayor Medina?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Oh, and you know what? And I apologize, team, because we could have listened to the comments and then taken it all. So
that's what I got stumped.
Got ahead of myself. What I'm going to do is we're going to go through F, G, and H, and then we'll take them as a collective. So first, let's start with Marty's item, which was F, the resolution accepting the project design, accepting the Susan Drive intersection improvement project as complete. Marty.
Yes. I brought this up because it's been an ongoing issue up in that area, and I know that it went through the TSPC and it came back to council, and staff were able to get this job done, I believe effectively, but I wanted to also allow staff to kind of give a quick little rundown on it, because it is more of a unique project that we've done that I have not seen done before here in San Bruno.
Sure.
Director Tan, please.
Yes. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I can provide a brief overview of the project. It is unique. It's something that we haven't done before. And initially, when we were looking at this site distance issue, staff brought the item to council with the recommendation of installing bulb outs at these intersections, but the cost of those were of concern. So staff was requested to look into other different measures, to have some similar effect at these intersections. So with that, staff came back to council to propose the installation of these curb extensions with these rubber bumpers, and then with some painted red curbs at these intersections, and then also the installation of these high visibility crosswalks. So 4 intersections were completed as part of this project: Fastman Drive and Susan Drive, Jeffrey Drive at Susan, as well as Summit Road and Elston Drive. So the city signed a contract with Chris Company in the amount of $57,000 for this project. And currently there was a change order of about close to $9,000. But the overall project had a budget of about 81. Which was approved for $100,000, and the total project is currently at $81,000. So this leaves a remaining budget of $18,000, which will be returned back to Measure A. So the thought is for the improvements to allow the cars that are at the side streets when they're approaching Susan Drive to be able to move closer to Susan Drive, so that they'll be able to see the oncoming traffic from both directions, which additional red curbs and then the bulb outs would be able to help with that, with those visibility issues. So with that, I can answer any other questions that you may have. Thank you.
Marty?
Just wanted to follow up. Have there been any efforts to contact the residents in that area to see how they feel that they're working, to see how much easier it is for them to see around those vehicles?
We haven't reached out to any of the residents within that area. No, that's something that we can do if that's an interest from the council.
I think I would be interested in that. It was a pretty heated TSPC meeting, and I think it's effective. I've driven over there a few times, and I feel I can see a lot more as I'm trying to make those turns.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions from council?
Through the chair.
Mr. Salazar.
Yes. And just in terms of trying to evaluate how effective this all, I know there were some speed signs that were part of this, and I'm just wondering if there's a way to monitor the speed and see if it's any better now that feedback is there. I know we don't capture the data, but if we have data from prior to those signs going up and seeing how that looks now, that would be interesting to see just what the effect is. Because I know that was the other part of it. The visibility was one thing, but there's also a lot of speeding on that street.
Sure. The device that we installed, the speed sensor, the radar feedback signs that we installed at those along Susan Drive, there's one of them at Susan Drive, is capable of providing some data. And so we can take a look at that. We can download the information and take a look at whether there's any overall speeding in that stretch. It is a downhill towards College Drive from Susan, and there aren't too many stop signs within those intersections. So people do tend to go a little bit faster than normal, residential streets speed limits.
Yeah. Now both uphill and downhill, people like to go fast on that street. So yeah, any data would be that would be great just to see what kind of impact it had. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Also, I am toggling back and forth, but I'm seeing Mr. Stephen Seymour. I see a hand up, and I believe that you're asking to speak in regards to item F on the consent. So, City Clerk, if you can, if you need to unmute and see if Mr. Seymour, if I've got him right on the F item that he wanted to speak
on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Honestly, it's not on the F item. It took me 40 minutes to get into this tonight. I really wanted a public comment. So if you want to move, I don't want to interrupt what you're talking about right now.
So is it on something else on the consent?
It's not on the consent. It took me more than 45 minutes.
All right, Mr. All right.
And a lot of us, I mean, we're going back and forth with a bunch of us.
Mr. Seymour, I appreciate, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let's, if it's not on this, I'm going to get back and then we'll continue to move forward.
Yeah, that's what I said. Not now.
Okay.
Whenever you find time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. If not, anything else, Marty? Good. Okay. So why don't we go on to item G under consent, which is adopt a resolution. This is approving the design, authorizing the city manager to execute a construction contract with American Asphalt Repair and Resurfacing Company, Inc. for FY 1920 slurry steel project, and approving a construction contingency and appropriating $55,000 from Measure A fund balance. Laura.
Thank you. I just really want to kind of comment on this particular item because I think it's one of those things, and I'm sure for other council member who's been out talking to residents that, when is my street going to get paved? Where are we at with, why is the neighbor or the street around the corner getting paved, and why is my street not getting paved? And so I just, a couple of things. So here we've got a $500,000 project. And this project is really only to slurry a handful of streets in San Bruno. And Jimmy, one of the questions, I don't know if you know this offhand, but what percentage of streets is this one project? Less than 10% of our streets. And slurry is not grinding them up and repaving them like a lot of streets needed. In addition, this project is really just to address some streets that fall into what we call collector or arterial streets. Can't say that right. But one of the things I will be asking council when we come back again is to provide really residents with an opportunity to say, well, where's my street on this list, right? We have what's called a PCI, which determines the grading of your street in terms of the condition of your street. And we know that overall San Bruno streets aren't in a great condition, and that we fall into 64 on the PCI. But more importantly, you live on a street, it hasn't been paved in many years, you want to know when, and where do I fall? And so I don't know, it's at some point that we can look at, a 5-year plan, and what streets can possibly make it to the list. Maybe, it's you can't hold us to it because things can change and funding changes as well. But this is an expensive item for just slurry. It's only a handful of streets, and I just think that residents care and want to know, which is why I wanted to actually kind of talk about it aside. There's a map that's included and a list of streets that are included with this presentation. So if you're logged in and you haven't had a chance to look at the agenda, it's a good opportunity to see which streets are on the list. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Marty, please.
Yeah, I also was pulling this to discuss it a little bit because slurry is to take care of the streets that are in decent shape, to preserve that street so it doesn't degrade as quickly as others. We are in a situation where we have, as a council, now in the past, we have not had the funds available to do more repair and maintenance. And this is one of the reasons why I believe our residents supported Measure G. My comments on this project specifically are, I was curious how at the Marymount development, the whole interior of that development is being slurried. And then on the Marisol, it isn't. I could already imagine how somebody who lives just on that other part of that street in that development is going to say, why not mine? And that's pretty common, but because everybody wants their street to get a treatment. And I was wondering if, what was the thought behind that? In the future, as Councilmember Davis mentioned, I think it's important that we do have a schedule that, based on the amount of money that we would spend, how long is it going to take for all the streets in San Bruno to get done? And it's going to take a lot of time. Just that I think it'd be important to share that information as we're going forward to know how much % of the streets are being done currently, and with the next set of years of planning of how much money we're going to spend, which is going to be a lot, because just on this one little project, it's very expensive. So I'll leave those questions with the staff, and thank you.
Sure.
City manager?
Yeah, why don't I just take the latter question, which is how long will it take us to pave all of our streets? When we went out for Measure G and we developed the factual information around it, one of the things we knew is that even in a good year, which we know we're not in now, Measure G was estimated to bring $4 million a year. And even if all of that went to streets, it would not solve our problem. I believe the number is, depending on if we were going to do it in a 5 or 10 year horizon, it was somewhere between, we needed $6 or $8 million just to bring our streets to an 80% PCI where we needed them. And so one of the things that we were very factual about, and I think we need to constantly remind the public of, is that Measure G, even if 100% of it went to the roads, would not solve the road problem. We're at a point to where $4 million a year additional is not enough. And Measure G will potentially go to other things. roads plus. And so I think it's important to know that we have a fiscal sustainability issue, and it's going to take a multi-pronged, multi-year solution to get to where we need to be for roads and other items. I do want to turn it to the Public Works Director to address the points specifically on this item.
Sure. Good afternoon. Good evening, actually. Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. In regards to the selection of the streets, the city actually uses a program, a software called Street Savers, and to select the streets. And the program actually provides an output of what the recommendations are. So, staff don't arbitrarily go ahead and select, certain streets within the street network to be able to repave or resurface. We rely on this software, which is similar to what other agencies do, up and down the peninsula as well as in the East Bay. And so we have both the the reconstruction project and as well as this preventative maintenance. As Councilmember Medina mentioned, this is for prevention of some of these good streets to prevent them from failing, because we just can't go ahead and spend more money to reconstruct these streets in the future, because we have these are like somewhat like a cheaper way of providing some treatment so that these good streets don't end up failing in the future. So, or else we'll end up spending more money to reconstruct these streets in the future. So it is, this is a project when Councilmember Davis mentioned or inquired how many miles of this right now on the list of streets. I don't have that number on top of my head. We, as mentioned in the staff report, there's a total of 89 center miles within our street network. I don't know what the percentage is in relation to this project is, in relation to the total lane miles. So yeah, it is very expensive, and previously when I first started in San Bruno here, we were only budgeting $800,000 a year in the in the paving program, and which was a drop in the bucket to be able to do what we need to do. And as city manager mentioned, there is a need of about $8 million a year in order to get that PCI up to 80 if we wanted to. The last deferred evaluation that we did to look at how much the entire need, there's a backlog of, if we only do certain streets a year, these deferred maintenance costs will start to escalate. It's in the order of $40-something million in the next 10 years if we don't do anything in these for these streets. So funding is an issue, and I know Measure G is also there, but as city manager mentioned, it's just not enough to be able to go around to be able to do everything that we want to do with these streets in our city.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Linda.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's just me, but I'm kind of new to the different phases and levels of the street repair. So first, I'd like to ask if the council agrees for just a future report on where we are with street repairs, and then the different, like you said, slurry, and then I think at one of the last meetings we talked about repaving, and then there's like a whole different term, I believe, when you're redoing the entire street. And so I think it would be great, because this was a pretty, I think people are quite vocal about having their streets repaired, and it would be great just to have, I don't want to take too much time, but a really brief report on the different levels of street repair. And then it sounds like the work's already been done around where the streets fall within those levels. So like how many streets are within, they need a total repavement, how many streets fall within the slurry. And maybe we can just start there, because I agree with Councilmember Davis that we really do need to have plans for these larger initiatives. And then I'm looking at my map right now trying to remember a street, and I believe it was 7th Avenue. That was just, that street just desperately needs to be redone. And I'm wondering if we're better off using the term slurrying these streets that may be in better condition versus saving that cost for 2 years and redoing an entire street that has never been redone. So I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that. It's just I know that there were some streets that I just thought were in such horrible condition.
Sure.
City manager.
Sure. Why don't I take the beginning of that? Linda, one of the things we do every year during our capital budgeting process that is coming up is we talk about all of the streets that we're planning to address that year with the budget, within the budgeted resources that we have, and we talk about the various treatment types: slurry seal, grind and overlay, complete reconstruction. And so as we begin the capital budgeting process for the upcoming fiscal year FY 2021, we will certainly have that conversation and give the city council a full overview of the different treatment types and why we're planning what we're planning. I think to your latter question about would we potentially be better off with not slurry sealing these streets and going forward with maybe a street that is more further degraded. One of the things that the Street Saver program does, and that's the program that Director Tan mentioned, is that it takes a look at the PCI of all of our roads, and it does the calculation based on where is the most appropriate place for you to utilize your limited dollars. And actually, sometimes that works out to be slurry sealing the road that is in, let's say, moderate condition is actually more cost effective because you want to protect that road, and you may not have enough money to address that road that is very significantly degraded, and that could potentially be exponentially more. And so when you have limited resources, sometimes the program and decisions are made to slurry seal roads to protect them so they do not degrade further, because a fully degraded road is, let's say, not getting a lot more worse, waiting another 6 months or another year, but it's important to protect the integrity of a road that has started to develop that alligator cracking and have a penetration in the surface, because you do not want the water to penetrate down and further degrade the subbase. And so all of that is taken into account with the engineers when these recommendations and funding allocations are made.
Linda, is that?
Sorry, I had to unmute. So I think just, I guess talking this out a little bit, if you have roads, and I don't know because I don't have the dates of when a road was last repaved or last slurried, but would there be any concerns around there being an imbalance? Because that, like, let's say the east side or the avenues, I'll just say maybe if they've never been repaved and versus parts of San Bruno, even where I'm in Huntington Park, where there has been, it appears that work has been done in our streets, which came out very nice. But my concern is that if the streets, like in the avenues, are in such bad condition that they're not going to have their turn because we're spending all of our money trying to just keep these other streets from getting in worse condition. So I guess I'm just trying to balance out when will there be a balance of everyone having their streets redone? Is that being considered? Does that make sense? Should I rephrase the question?
When we do the capital budgeting process and when we look at where can we best utilize the dollars we have. And Director Tan, you can probably articulate a little bit of sort of the exponential costs when you're looking at road reconstruction. For example, this is a project at about $500,000. When you really look at reconstructing a roadway, of any significant length, you're talking about a lot more than $500,000. Director Tan.
Yeah, so a while back ago, street paving is always, I guess, a hot topic, right? Because a lot of people, do feel that their streets it needs to be paved. The city actually has done a study session with the council a while back ago too. And maybe that's something that is worthwhile doing to kind of share some of our information in regards to when these streets need to be the graphs showing when the preventative maintenance should be performed, and overall cost of reconstruction, rehabilitation, and slurry seal. Because, if you go down the line, there's 3 different treatments, right? The preventive maintenance is the most cheapest, which is this slurry seal. It can cover, with the $500,000, it could cover multiple miles, many miles, within the city. But if you're going to do reconstruction, where you have to dig into the base layer of the streets, it tends to cost a lot more. So maybe a block 1,000 feet could be about as high as $300,000 or $400,000, to do that. But if you're doing just the mill and fill, it could be maybe half as that for 1,000 feet. So we do have those estimated numbers, and then there's we have all these presentation slides that we prepared for on previous study sessions that we can share with the council again to let you know what we've done. So recently we came back, I think last council meeting, we came to council for the SB1 funding. And that was, a subcommittee was derived, in order for us to use the SB1 money for these failed street locations, because that's what the subcommittee wanted to do, because those failed streets cost a lot of money to reconstruct, because you can't really just take your $800,000 or $1 million or whatever the money that you have and just focus on the failed streets. Because what happens is that then your good street will end up failing, and because there are potentially a lot more percentage of good streets within the city that will potentially start to fail, then you'll never catch up to be able to go ahead and start, reconstructing, because the cost of reconstruction is just exponentially really a lot higher than preventative maintenance. So we're always trying to try to do preventive maintenance to try to make sure that these good streets don't end up failing at a faster rate, and then so we can always take whatever the money that's left over to be able to focus on other streets within the street network.
Right, but I appreciate the answer, but I don't feel that there was an answer given. I want to make sure that when we're balancing the amount of the repaving that's occurring, which I respect that and understand what you're saying, that preventative maintenance is crucial to not having to expend even more money at a later time. I guess my question though is, when you look at certain streets, like even off Rosewood, I remember seeing this little portion of the street that just has holes all over it, right? I mean, I'm guessing that would probably need to be repaved. It wouldn't need to be slurried. But if we're spending all of our money on the preventative maintenance, and that means that in and of itself, we're really only focusing on the areas that essentially are already in pretty good condition. Whereas you have streets that I was told by many people, since the time they moved in, they've never had their street repaved. So I guess my question going back is, when you're saying we'll put some money aside of whatever's left over, I don't know that whatever's left over will ever be enough to really truly initiate repaving certain streets that have never been repaved. And so I guess my question is really like, how do you get to that, to the streets that truly need to be repaved so that they can be part of the preventative maintenance program in the next 15 years, right? I get this is a very long-term plan, but I want to make sure that everyone's going to get to have nice streets at some point.
Jimmy, let me take that. Linda, I think the best way to do that is through more funding. And when we educated the community around Measure G, one of the sort of fortunate statistics out there is that many of our roads had not had a major reconstruction in the last 30 years. And that is a sad fact based on the amount of funding that we have in total to go to road maintenance. And road maintenance is one thing where you sort of every year have to do a little bit of both. You have to do a little bit of protecting the streets that just need a slurry seal so they don't get worse. And you have to do a full reconstruction on that is exponentially more expensive. And you have to do some road reconstruction. And I think when we talk project by project, it is very easy to say, why are we doing this slurry seal versus not doing construction? The best way to have that conversation is when we look at the totality of our capital improvement program during our annual budgeting process, because every year we do a little bit of both. And Generally, every city does a little bit of both because you really want to. If you only focused on all of your money on reconstruction of failed roads, your total backlog and your total financial burden would increase because you need to do some protection of those roads that really just need a slurry seal to stop the water penetration. And so it's a very complicated process that has gone through, and there's a lot of data that backs up all of the recommendation of how we do the treatment. I think the unfortunate answer is the reason why we have a PCI in the 60s and most of our streets having not had a major road repair in the last 30 years is unfortunately as a city, we have not had the money to devote significant sums to paving reconstruction. And that has a position now where we need approximately $8 million a year just to get our average PCI to 80. And that's on a 0 to 100 scale. And with measured, we have 4 million.
Okay, and so that'll come to us and at a later time to see what that balance is?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Marty?
Yeah, I can tell my colleagues here that it is a funding problem. When I first got on the council, I believe the number was 3 million a year to get us up to a respectable PCI. And I'm in support of this project specifically. I think it's a good practice to spend money to do the preventive maintenance. Clearly, throughout San Bruno, there's dozens of streets that could be redone that are in horrible shape. The city is proceeding with replacing pavement as we replace the water and the sewer on the east side of town currently. That takes time, and that takes a lot of money. My question regarding the Marisol is that if they're in that contingency, if you could see to utilize that, because slurries don't have as big of a unforeseen condition than regular paving when you're milling into the ground and hit a soft spot. These streets are already in a good shape. So if you could find a way to spread that within that full development so you don't need to come back to it and then do a couple slurry streets, that would be great. I do recommend that we do have a study session on paving just to advise the public on why it really is a fine balancing act. But if you don't have the funds, which we don't, we can't get, we're barely scratching the surface, right? And that's why I fully supported Measure G. And I'm looking forward to having that discussion of letting our public know this is when you can expect your street to get paved on this level of work product that we're going to be spending every year. So it's tough, but I'm in supporting this project, and it's time to move forward. Thank you.
Just real quick, and Jimmy, please correct me, I forget now, was it SB1 where we received extra revenues, which was determined to go to failed streets specifically?
That's correct.
So just as the SB1, when that came into effect, the subcommittee which went to the council and they all concurred was, hey, those extra monies, which the city was not normally going to receive, let's make sure they're dedicated to those failed streets, not just slurry. So council did take action before for those dollars to go toward that. There was a time before too, as we were getting reimbursed from the trust from the pipeline explosion, that we had $3 million come back for staff time, which is already expended through the normal budget process, which we had $1 million that the council concurred, $1 million each year, which I'd asked it to be diverted to keep our PCI up, which had helped it to maintain. But as Marty has said too, it is costly. There also, and correct me, Director Tan, there's a system in which all the streets are looked at, ranked, and try to figure the dollars. So it's not about one side, the other side. It's kind of more of a global look at the community and to see where it has been. And I know that I had asked in the past that, hey, when we're having these proposed streets to come up, let's also know the last time they were done, some work was done, so that we can kind of also, because if we see it's 5 years before, and then there's other streets that maybe have been decades, then we need to, I think, be mindful of that. So that is something that I think, as city manager said during the CIP, it can come up, bring that forward. We used to have a subcommittee on infrastructure, which we've done away with that. And the reason I thought it was more important, because I think on these critical masses and things that are important to the community, rather than going to a subcommittee trying to get that and having the subcommittee come back to the council, we're all hearing the same information real time and kind of shaving off a layer of bureaucracy and extra meetings. So I think it's important that we're all in this together and that we all have that information, because obviously, no matter where you go in this community, you're going to find somebody who has a street or a concern legitimately that feels that their street should have been next. So I appreciate all the good conversation. If there's nothing else, I don't see hands. I'm going to move on to item H, if that's okay. And that is adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a grant agreement with California Natural Resources Agency for the award of a general fund specific grant in the amount of $913,333. And the only reason I brought that up was just as a point that this was a grant that was sought after in early 2019 from CCAG. Went through that process, and this city was awarded that grant. And the great news is that there is no local matching funds necessary or required from the city of San Bruno in order to accept this. So that is a big plus for San Bruno and an asset to have. And I want to thank staff for their efforts, because obviously they did the work. If there's nothing else on our consent, we do have items F, G, and H. Is there any action?
Through the chair?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve those, but also wanted to just say there was a question about where people could find out about where their streets are. And
yes,
they go to the city's website and just if they search on City of San Bruno PCI, there is information that's been updated as of March of 2020 that shows the ranking of all the streets in the city. And so if people think their streets are bad, they can always go there and see how much worse some of the other streets are. My street is on the failed list, just by the way. But with that, I will introduce the remaining items for approval.
I'll second.
Motion by Salazar, seconded by Davis to approve remainder of consent. Melissa, can you take roll?
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Mason?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Yes.
Mayor Medina?
Aye, yes.
Motion carries.
What I want to do is with Councilor.
Mayor, sorry. I'm sorry, before you move on, I meant to say something for consent. We already approved it, but it's just actually if Melissa would be willing to clarify in the minutes, if I may, on March 10th, there was no mention that the council did not approve the $45,000 contract, which was part of the title. I think it just says something like the council agreed to move forward with like the intent. But I think it should be clear, since it was part of the resolution, that the council did not agree to award the $45,000 contract to the consulting company. So I'm not sure what the process would be, but I would just say if the record could reflect that in the minutes.
I don't mind reflecting it to indicate that the $45,000 contract with I forget the company name, but National Demographics or something like that, that it did not go through on March 10th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
The contract itself was not correct.
Right. The contract itself was not adopted that night.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.